So today we're talking about the value of compassion. What is it?
So, value of compassion, it's basically us saying that we're not better than anyone and we've received compassion from God and we should show compassion to other people. We should be kind, generous, as we've talked about previously.
Yeah, see everyone as valued.
Yeah.
Themselves, God's creation. You know, we're all created in His image, so everyone is, and therefore everyone is to be loved and honoured and respected in the same way.
Sweet. What's the biblical basis for this?
Yeah.
God created us in His image, and this idea of it's throughout history it's been called the Imago Dei, the image of God. This idea that human beings intrinsically have a value because we're made in God's image. It's been a foundation of lots of things in sort of our culture, human rights, all of those sorts of things. Find their root in that belief that human beings are made in the image of God, and so have an intrinsic value and worth that's beyond just, we're not just animals and pieces of meat, there's something different about us.
Yeah, it's kind of the biblical principle that dictates the whole Bible is God's compassion, His love and His grace is what caused Jesus Christ to come and for us to be saved no matter where we are in life. And then you've got the whole New Testament just reminding us that there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. There's just nothing. There's just God's creation, His wonderful children that He wants back in relationship with Him.
When Jesus came, He began His ministry with a sort of taking on a mandate for Himself, which was, he quotes from Isaiah 61, he says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me because He's anointed me to bring good news to the poor, sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." And it's this idea that Jesus came in order to bring freedom to people, to bind up the brokenhearted. He says in various places in the gospel that He was moved with compassion and He healed the sick, or He was moved with compassion because the people were like sheep without a shepherd. And so we want to work as much as we can in order to reflect that attitude that Jesus had of seeing people as sheep without a shepherd rather than people who are an inconvenience to us or a drain on society.
Yeah, to set captives free means that you've got to do something. You know, you've got to act upon that. And again, we're not doing that in our own strength. We're saying we're partnering with the Holy Spirit because the sin that we act out against each other. God doesn't like that. God's angered and frustrated by the way in which we seem to be able to treat people without compassion, and therefore it's a transformative thing. When God says, "I want you to show compassion," it's not actually. Seems to not be our nature.
I think some people view prayer as not practical, which I think is probably the most practical thing you can do is to pray about something. But we want to be praying about things and physically active in pursuing that. James talks about being doers of the word, not just hearers. Which I think is important.
So if you think about the abolition of slavery and William Wilberforce and what he did, you know that's a guy who loved the Lord and you know, his faith moved him, but he did something. But him alone, one person, takes on the entire slave trade. No, he obviously was praying into that, and there would have been. He wasn't. Again, he wouldn't have been praying alone. There'd be many that would have been praying that would end.
So it sounds like there's a really interweaving of these values already with the freedom value into the value of generosity. And this sounds like it's a collective effort to have this compassion. So what's the vision behind the value of compassion then?
I think it's a vision to see a church that is welcoming. I think it's important when we talk about vision to talk about things that you want to see rather than things that you don't. It talks in the Bible about welcome each other as God has welcomed us, that there's a sense in which God made every effort in order to welcome us into relationship with Him. And so we want to be a church that does that. We want to be making effort to welcome people into the family of God. Talking about hospitality, where that's listed in terms of eldership and the requirement there, it means welcoming the outsider, not just being able to throw a good dinner party. It means welcoming people who aren't part of the family of God into your home and making them feel welcome.
Globally, you know, we are involved in IJM. We've got a heart for that as a church. We've got several key individuals in the church that really lead that initiative, but we as an eldership also feel connected to that. The idea of international justice is critical, so injustice wherever it happens in the world.
Yeah, and the Bible talks about doing good to all as you have opportunity, especially to those who are of the household of faith, part of the church. I think there's this strange thing sometimes where Christians can feel like they're rivals to one another. I don't know where it comes from, but this idea that actually we're meant to bear one another's burdens, we're meant to be compassionate to one another, we're meant to encourage and build up one another. There's a sense in which we need to push into being more compassionate to one another, more gracious, more kind, more generous, as we said elsewhere, but having that sort of a view of, not just you've got yourself in that mess, you need to get out of it. I think, yes, we need to exercise wisdom and those sorts of things, but sometimes the circumstances are we need to be compassionate and we need to be generous and loving and kind and support our brothers and sisters in the church.
Well, thank you so much for sharing the value of compassion and sharing some tips as well. And we'll look at another value next time.
Really great to be with you this morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Sarah, as I was introduced, and I'm here with my lovely husband Tom and my little girl Amelie, who's nearly 2. And today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the value of compassion that you as a church have, and also a little bit about the work of IJM and how compassion and justice, how they come together and they work together. So first of all, many of you, sorry, that zooms in on this thing of compassion. So many of you will already know a little bit about IJM, but if not, I just wanted to introduce us. We're a global organisation working to combat slavery, sex trafficking, issues of everyday violence, and more. You might be familiar with the statistic that there are more than 45 million individuals being held today in modern-day slavery. Just blows my mind, that number. You know, you can't imagine the individuals in that, but 45 million individuals around the world. And so we work as an organisation across the developing world to, first of all, rescue victims. So get people out of situations of trafficking, violence, and more. See survivors restored. So when they're rescued, we want to see them fully restored and able to live a normal and productive life. Then we restrain criminals. So there's no point rescuing people if you're not going to stop the crimes happening in future. So we restrain criminals and we see that they are brought to justice. And then we seek to repair the justice system. So we work alongside governments and local authorities, trying to get their justice systems so they function to protect their people. You know, when laws don't work, violence and exploitation just flourish. I'd love to share a story with you to start with. So I'm just going to move that. I'd love to share a story with you to start with, a recent story of a recent rescue in IJM Chennai. So Chennai in India on the 26th of May, just a few weeks ago. Local officials and our IJM team there, rescued a family from an abusive brick kiln. So when they arrived, they found a couple, a husband and a wife, and they said that they were being held against their will, along with their 4 very young children. And at the time, they were on their own, and so our social workers and the people who were there immediately did a quick interview to find out what the situation was. And then they returned back to their hut, and they discovered that these 4 children were missing. And the mother, who was pregnant, is still heavily pregnant, was just absolutely frantic, as you can imagine. These children, I think the oldest was 7, so 4 young children under 7. And the IJM team and the local officials who were there were, rushing around the compound for more than 2 hours, trying to find these lost children. I've got a little video here of the mother who is sort of searching for her children. It just makes it real, doesn't it? You know, this mother, just like some of us are mothers, you know, that feeling, that desperation. And after 2 hours, amazingly, someone spotted some footprints in the sand. These footprints in the sand. And they followed these footprints up a hillside, and there they found these 4 children huddled closely together, absolutely petrified. And these children, when they were returned to their mother, they were so scared it took them absolutely ages to even open up to the IJM team. And they'd actually been kidnapped. They told them that they'd been kidnapped by the slave owner's wife and taken away and forced to hide. You know, amazingly, this family was freed, and the kiln owner is going to be will be charged in a few weeks. And a local NGO is now helping this family. They return back to their village, and they will be part of IJM have a 2-year aftercare program with our work rescuing slaves. So they will be put into this 2-year aftercare program and be able to hopefully be able to, you know, have a different way of providing and caring for their family. I think it's important to note that this family were not being held by walls, but they were being held by fear. Fear of what would happen if they tried to escape or they disobeyed their masters. You know, slavery today is not just about chains, but it's about power over others. It's about fear that keeps people trapped. So this just gives you an idea of why we do what we do at IJM and what you as a church are involved with. And just to say again, you know, thank you for your partnership, for your commitment to supporting us. So it was great. Let's grab some water. It was really great to see the video of your elders sharing about compassion. I got to see it before I spoke, which was fantastic. And I was also inspired as I was preparing today to see the other values that you have as a church. There's a big list of values. I just thought that's really powerful to have a focus as a church of things that you believe in and things you want to commit to. Just thought it was really powerful. Compassion is a wonderful, powerful, and emotive word. You know, in Latin, the word compati means suffer with. It's not something that happens in isolation. It's active and proactive. When we feel compassion for others, you know, we're moved by their situation. We're compelled to respond, to act, to be a part of the solution. And our model and motivation for compassion as Christians is displayed in the compassion we see from God, the compassion that God has for his people, and the compassion of Jesus that we see throughout his ministry. Jesus walks and talks compassion, doesn't he? You know, he looks beyond the surface situation, and he sees people. He seeks to understand where an individual is at. You know, what's their concern? What's their challenge? Where do they need a fresh touch from God? Some healing, encouragement, practical action. And Jesus also teaches compassion in his stories, doesn't he? The story of the Good Samaritan is such a powerful story of compassion, of one individual crossing social, cultural, personal barriers and seeing this individual as someone, as we saw in the video, someone of intrinsic value and worth. Someone created just as we are in the image of God. He sees that person, he thinks, actually, that person's just like me. And how would I feel if I was in that position? I would want someone to step up, to show compassion. And he does. And he provides his emotional and physical needs in that moment. On another occasion, Jesus shows compassion in spite of his own situation, just showing how powerful it is. I found it really powerful as I reflected on Matthew 14, verses 13 to 14. So just before this, we read that John the Baptist had been beheaded. John the Baptist who baptized Jesus. You know, it's the one who came before him, someone he would have known and loved. This would have been a huge thing for him to hear. But it says this: when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, when I read this, I got a sense of sadness, when it says that he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Jesus needed to be alone. You imagine he was retreating in prayer, wanting to be close to his Father. But when he hears the crowds and he sees their troubles and hurts and needs, he's moved with compassion. He feels their suffering and he's moved to respond. He's compelled to respond, and he heals the sick. And the passage goes on to talk about how he feeds the 5,000. So that would have been probably hundreds of people. Compassion is so powerful. Compassion in action is so powerful. And as I was preparing for today and reflecting on the work of IJM in relation to this core value of the church, I was struck by this idea that the work of IJM and organisations like us is what happens when compassion and justice meet. What happens when compassion and a desire for justice meet. So justice is an interesting word. It's a word that we hear more and more often, I think, that we're probably all very familiar with, and we probably all have an understanding of what it means, but it can cover a multitude of different things, can't it? We might understand justice in the sort of the legal context, seeing the justice is done, the right outcome happens. But I also find reflecting on the opposite of justice, injustice, is really helpful. There are the small injustices of life that can niggle us. Dare I mention the football? I'm not sure if you call that an injustice, but perhaps closer to home. That thing when you come into a car park and it's rammed full, and you sort of diligently wait there with your car, waiting for someone to come out, and then you see someone coming out, and then someone else, a van driver, nips in, steals your spot, and just swans off. Yes, this happened to me recently, and I had a few polite words with the gentleman as I was waiting with a baby and blah, blah, blah. Those small injustices of life that can just frustrate us a little bit. And then there are the darker injustices of our world. Vulnerable people being exploited. People discriminated against because of a disability, maybe. Or the colour of their skin. Slavery, as we heard earlier. Injustice is the abuse of power. When those who have more power take advantage of those with less power. Injustice in the form of exploitation, like a lot of the work that we do at IJM, it strips desperate, vulnerable people of their dignity, of their opportunity, their support structures, their ability to control or decide their future. In the story we heard earlier, those slave owners had already stripped that family of their dignity, of their freedom, of their ability to decide and choose, like I was saying. But in a desperate bid to maintain that extra bit of power over them, they tried to strip away everything they loved. From the children, their parents, from the parents, their young children. In a bid to bring fear to their lives and to keep them where they were. It's that power over others. And injustice, sadly, is a reality of the fallen world that we live in, isn't it? When we can become overwhelmed by it. We only have to, open the BBC app on our phones and just see that something else awful has just happened. I went to a conference a few weeks ago, and the focus of this conference was online child exploitation of sexual abuse of children online. And the challenges of grooming and how we can possibly guard our children when they're online. And I left this day, as you can imagine, feeling pretty exhausted. And actually my overriding feeling was, how can I possibly keep my little 2-year-old girl from growing up? I wanted her to stay just as she is. She's currently innocent to the world. And it's wonderful, isn't it, when they just don't have a clue what's out there. It's precious and amazing. But I can't do that. So failing that, I was like, can I create some kind of protective bubble to keep her in until she's about 40 or something? But obviously I can't do that either. You know, when we have to live in this world, don't we? We have to live in this world. But not only that, we have to thrive in this world. And we have to find joy and hope and see the delight and light in the darkness of this world. But if we have to be part of a fallen world, then, you know, shouldn't we perhaps be playing our part to try and change it? And as Christians, our call to do this is even more powerful. Because justice is not only IJM's middle name, International Justice Mission, just to remind you, but it's also God's. It's a lame joke, I know. It wasn't even received as a joke, but justice is God's middle name. God is a God of justice. It's who he is. It's central to his character. You know, I don't know if you've ever heard, sometimes heard of situations of injustice that have really got you there. You know, you hear about some form of abuse or something that just grips you and makes you feel so angry, frustrated, sad. And I just really feel that those feelings are a glimpse into the heart of our God. I feel like God's heart breaks for injustice every single day. And those feelings are just a flash into his heart for how he feels about those people. But this is not just a feeling. You know, it's clear from the Bible how God's heart burns for injustice. It's absolutely throughout the whole Bible. He sees injustice and he hates it. But more than that, he's calling his people to respond. We see this most clearly in God's commissioning of Moses to go and rescue his people out of the hands of a cruel Pharaoh. Now we know that Moses had a bit of a troubled start to his life. He was a Hebrew, he was rescued from the Nile by Pharaoh's daughter, grew up in Pharaoh's household, and then realized who he was, and then killed an Egyptian soldier, was then rejected by his own people, and then was almost killed, and then escaped, and then, became a shepherd. And no doubt he was pretty confused and pretty kind of, he's already had a tough life so far, and could be forgiven for wanting sort of an uneventful life. But no, we read this. Now Moses was attending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw the bush was on fire. He saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Do not come any closer. Moses said, importantly, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. And I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. You know, the whole story of God calling Moses to rescue the Israelites is a clear example of God's passionate heart for justice. But not just that. We hear that God is calling his people to respond. God sees the need and has great compassion. You know, we heard his heart breaks for the injustices of the world, and he has a great plan to respond. And that plan is us. And, you know, we might hear this and be like, okay, she said 45 million individuals. We are the plan. You know, it's kind of scary, isn't it? And I can imagine Moses, well, we know Moses, you know, when he hears this, you know, I'm paraphrasing this, but Moses probably felt a little bit like this when he hears God say to him, okay, off you go to the cruel Pharaoh, that leader that tried to kill you. Just bring my people back with you, please. And Moses is like, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? But then we get this wondrous sense of release, don't we? When God, the God of heaven and earth, says, I will be with you. Wow, what amazing backup that is. You know, and then later, Moses questions his ability, just as I'm sure we would. You know, what do I have to offer? And God says, what is in your hand? And what does Moses have in his hand? He has a staff. And we saw amazing things that he did with that simple staff that was in his hand. And for each of us, it'll be something different. What is the same for all of us is that God is calling us to respond to the injustices of the world. So justice is the wrongs of the world righted. Compassion is compati, to suffer with, to feel another's suffering and have a desire to respond. Both are central to the character and heart of God. And, you know, as Christians, you know, we don't have to be there. We don't have to be at the end. We're all on a continual journey of becoming more like Jesus, aren't we? That's the whole point of why we're here. We're wanting to become more like Jesus with every step that we take. You know, the more we pursue his character and his will and say yes to Jesus, the more we become like him. The more we become spiritually transformed. And we begin to see the world as he sees it and feel the things that he feels. And the deeper our desire becomes to respond, using whatever it is he's put in our hands. When compassion and justice meet, I was thinking about this, when compassion and justice, a desire for justice meet, amazing things happen. IJM as an organisation was born out of compassion and a desire for justice. Gary Haugen, our founder, was a human rights lawyer in the States, grew up pretty ordinary life, didn't really have connection with many of the injustices of the world. And he was sent to Rwanda to investigate the genocide there, where more than 1 million people were slaughtered, killed by each other. And he just got a sense of the deep, deep injustice. And he knew he had to respond. And so he went away and he used what was in his hand. He was a lawyer. And he started IJM with a vision to see justice for everyone around the world. When compassion and justice meet, we see action in the form of the brilliant Mission Freedom Group that you guys have here. We were chatting about the Mission Freedom Group here. I was chatting with James, my colleague, just saying how brilliant you guys are. You know, organising unique events, raising funds, and importantly, the more we do, the more we're sharing about the issues and raising awareness. And also as a church, you know, your ear is tuned to God's call for justice, you know, as you seek to support IJM. For me, when compassion and justice met, I knew I had to put down a desire for a career in theatre and singing and sort of wanting to do all that kind of stuff. and to work and to respond to global issues. That's where I started my life out with Peter Wiles. Not my actual life, but our work life. And initially, I sort of wanted to go and be on the ground. I kind of wanted to be where the action is. I wasn't glamorizing it, but I wanted to sort of be helping people. But then I realized over time, God was speaking to me, actually, my call was to be here. There's such a need for people in this country to know about these issues and to know that there's a need to respond. And I realized that what God was putting in my hand was an ability to communicate, to build relationships, and to share. And the vision of IJM, just to say, is not to send lots of expats out to these countries, but to raise up individuals within those countries, lawyers, social workers, to see change from within, to use again what's in their hands. And finally, when compassion and justice meet, prayer comes to life. It was great to hear the discussion about prayer on the video, about how prayer is active. For IJM, prayer and action go hand in hand. And as an organisation, we are absolute living testament to the power of prayer. Every single rescue, every single difficult situation we face, every single sort of thing that's going on is covered in prayer at IJM. We have personal prayer time, we have corporate prayer time where we pray about the issues. And it's really incredible to see the power of God, working when we pray. So I just want to encourage you, it might feel, when we talk about how sort of big these things are, it might feel like, well, my prayer just goes nowhere. But no, our prayers are heard, and I just want to encourage you to pray for these issues and believe that your prayers are heard.